Hey guys, so welcome back to The Oldest Magic. Last time I spoke about pathways and magic in storytelling. This time I want to focus on the concept of flight. And there's another story that I want to discuss in particular connected to the overall concept of flight, like mythologically, artistically, symbolically. So in the last video, I touched briefly on the novel The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I kind of compared and contrasted it to Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie, and also the 1953 Disney animation of Peter Pan as well. And so in this video, I want to discuss a movie this time, not a book. I'm really excited to discuss this film because I absolutely adore it. It is the 2019 movie, The Aeronauts, starring Felicity Jones and Eddie Redmayne. So the movie, The Aeronauts, is based on a book called Falling Upwards, or How We Took to the Air by Richard Holmes. And it's basically a kind of history of ballooning, in a sense. The movie itself is a completely fictionalized story. It stars Eddie Redmayne as a very fictionalized version of the meteorologist James Glacier. And as his companion, Felicity Jones plays a fictional character called Amelia Wren. And I want to go into detail regarding the storyline and some of the themes and ideas that are present in The Aeronauts. The movie got some criticism for being kind of like historically revisionist, in the sense that James Glacier was a real person, a real meteorologist who went on many ballooning expeditions. And his pilot was a man named Henry Coxwell. And the movie The Aeronauts omits the character of Henry Coxwell and substitutes it for this completely fictional character, Amelia Wren, played by Felicity Jones. That doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form, because I'm of the opinion that movies are kind of fairy tales, you know? Even movies that claim to be based on true stories are essentially adult fairy tales. I think that once you mix visual imagery with music, you know, those two things combined, you elevate the story to the level of myth. You're creating a modern myth or an adult fairy tale. And it's for this reason that I'm not bothered by the changes. I am fascinated by the in-universe story of The Aeronauts, the characters and the themes and the events that take place within the universe of the film itself. So Felicity Jones plays this character, Amelia Wren, and she plays Amelia with a kind of mixture of grief, humorous savvy, and a real sense of genuine wonder for the act of flight, for this pastime, this pursuit that she's engaged in. And it's kind of a complex character that Amelia is written as, because Amelia is the bride of a famous aeronaut called Pierre Wren. And it's interesting because I discussed Peter Pan in the last video, that Pierre is the French version of the name Peter. So, and I think Amelia, I would imagine that Amelia's character is named for the pilot Amelia Earhart, right? But be that as it may, the character of Amelia in The Aeronauts has dreams of Pierre, her husband, falling to his death. And over the course of the movie, which is told in a kind of non-linear fashion, we, the audience, learn that Amelia's husband died sacrificing himself to save Amelia's life in a ballooning expedition that went horribly wrong. And he leapt to his death in order to save her. And this weighs heavily on Amelia's heart, of course, and she is grieving her husband terribly. She loves him dearly. We kind of find Amelia in the beginning of the movie in this state of grief. She's become kind of detached from the passions of her heart. She doesn't want to take to the sky anymore. You know, she doesn't even want to deal with reality in any way. And Amelia's sister is constantly trying to get her out of this funk of depression and grief. And she's not having any of it. But then over the course of the movie, she gets introduced to Eddie Redmayne's character, James Glacier. And they kind of sort of form this kind of slowly a kind of mutual understanding, which then evolves into like a genuine friendship over the course of this historic ballooning expedition. So to me, it's interesting that the filmmakers chose a name like Pierre in a movie that is so clearly about flight and dreams and imagination, to represent Amelia's dead husband. And he falls out of the sky, and we see that image of him falling, a falling star constantly. It's a repeated motif throughout the movie. The reason I love The Aeronauts so much is because it is a movie that wears its heart on its sleeve. It's a movie full of depth, and I think a lot of it is put there intentionally by the filmmakers, the writers and the directors and the cinematographers, etc. But I think there's also a lot of depth and secrets hidden in the movie, put there by a higher power, for lack of a better term. So basically, the film's central theme, I'd say it's a combined one. It's one of overcoming grief, but it's also not being afraid to dream, daring to dream of higher things, of brighter things. There's a lot of references to light and stars and dreaming in the movie, peppered all the way throughout it. I find its themes and its storytelling incredibly beautiful. It's deeply resonant for me personally. Your mileage may vary, but it's a film that I would definitely suggest that you watch. So in the movie, James's father, Arthur, who is a stargazer, among other things, even though he's portrayed as a kind of a loving and a very gentle man, he doesn't really believe in James's dreams to be able to eventually predict the weather using ballooning expeditions and meteorology, He's talking about Isaac Newton, and he says, Isaac Newton changed everything, changed the very fabric of science. You just want to try and figure out if you can know when it's going to rain. And he kind of dismisses James's dreams in that way without quite meaning to. Later in the movie, we discover that Arthur, James's father, is suffering from early onset dementia. And it's interesting because in a key scene, he doesn't recognize James. And he says, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm your son." And Arthur's response is, "My son is 10 years old." And I find that interesting in a movie about dreaming and, the fantasies of youth, because he sees James still as an innocent boy, a youth, a child, which is interesting considering the other kind of very, very subtle Peter Pan references hidden throughout The Aeronauts. So yeah, Arthur says, "My son is 10 years old," and James tells him very sadly, "I got older." So the inference there is that James is kind of losing touch with his childhood innocence. He's growing up kind of against his will, but he hasn't fully let go of his dreams, his stargazing dreams, his dreams to make a difference, his dreams to read the patterns of the sky and read the patterns of the stars. And I find that very, very interesting. So in that same scene, James is peering through his father's telescope, and Arthur is sitting beside him, and they're having this discussion. And Arthur says, "You're going on a trip, aren't you?" He suddenly recalls the truth, even through his dementia. And he says to his boy, "You're going on a trip, aren't you? In a balloon, a trip to see the stars." So in that same scene, Arthur tells his boy about his own childhood dream he had that seems to be directly connected to his love of stargazing. And he tells James, "When I was young, I used to dream of using my bedsheet to catch a gust of wind and using my bedsheet as a parachute to dance amongst the stars." And later he tells James, "There is nothing more mysterious or more beautiful than the stars." And you can tell that James has really taken this to heart. Again, I find it interesting as someone who dearly loves the story of Peter and Wendy and the various iterations of the Peter Pan myth, and the idea of, second star to the right and straight on till morning. The idea that stars can be a home for angels. They can be a representation of beauty. They can be a physical representation of the angels themselves, or of childlike wonder, childlike hopes and dreams, a physical representation of beauty and awe and the mysteries of God. And I find that beautiful in that scene, that James's father, Arthur, named for a king, a famous British king, shares this moment of vulnerability with his son and tells his son something true about himself. it's interesting that James, who is symbolically the son of a king, therefore James is a prince, and a prince who takes to the air. And he's not a prince of the air in a kind of dark biblical Luciferian sense. He's a prince of the air in a very optimistic, childlike wonder kind of sense. So the movie is told non-linearly, right? And Amelia and James embark on this expedition. And as they do so, every now and again, we flash back to pieces of the story that took place before, and we kind of learn how their kind of connection formed, how and why Amelia decides to embark on this trip with James. What's interesting to me is there's a key scene at one point where Amelia and James are ascending in this basket, in this hot air balloon, up higher and higher through mist, and they can't see anything anymore. They can't see the sky. They're just in this kind of ethereal, ghost-like mist. And they hear, just randomly and almost impossibly, the sound of bells. Church bells, to be specific. And this sound of bells, it turns out, are the sounds from the street. They hear the sounds of horse hooves as well. And James kind of theorizes that the humidity in the air has kind of superconducted the sound up to a phenomenal height so that they can audibly hear the sounds of the street, even though they're thousands and thousands and thousands of feet in the air. And I find that really beautiful, ears to hear, as it were. Later on, a little bit later in the movie, they ascend through the mist into bright, clear, beautiful daylight. And it's a scene in the movie filled with awe and wonder. So I find it interesting that they previously had ears to hear, and now they're granted eyes to see, because what happens is a flock of beautiful yellow butterflies is traveling past the balloon, just hundreds and hundreds of them. James can't believe that butterflies could be up flying so high, and it's kind of a magical sight to him. And I kind of figure this scene as a host of angels, you know. A host of angels passes by James and Amelia on their quest to reach the stars, and to give them guidance, reassurance, a kind of brief respite from the struggles that they're enduring, ultimately to give them a sense of hope. And in that vein, one of these yellow butterflies alights on Amelia's shoulder, literally an angel on her shoulder motif. It's a beautiful scene in the movie, and it's very delicately handled and beautifully rendered. Yeah, so they're given eyes to see. They had ears to hear, and now they're given eyes to see. After that scene, obviously, the movie becomes more and more intense, and, you know, the adventures and the struggles that Amelia and James have to face as their balloon ascends higher and higher, those struggles get more and more intense. Eventually, Amelia is forced to climb along the outside of the balloon and literally ascends the balloon without any safety harness in order to save their lives. And she kind of half succeeds. And it's a thrilling sequence in the movie. It's absolutely beautifully handled for me. But then as we get to the climax of the movie, what I find interesting is that Amelia has kind of faced death already, and she has kind of tempted fate a little bit, but she's doing it out of friendship, you know. Like, it's interesting because a scene earlier in the movie, they kind of have James's character gets a little darker. He starts to get a little angry and threatens Amelia almost with kind of violence because he starts suffering from altitude sickness. And it kind of echoes the dementia of his father in the earliest scenes in the movie. So the strain of ascending to the stars is starting to put James under immense pressure psychologically, and he lashes out without realizing what he's doing and threatens, you know, this kind of burgeoning friendship between Amelia and James. Because over the course of the movie, she is learning to respect him and he is learning to respect her, and a genuine friendship is forming, but their quest is putting more and more strain on, you know, the limits of their friendship. How far are they willing to go for each other? So when Amelia decides to climb without any safety harness across the outside of the balloon in order to save she and James's lives, it's an act of incredible heroism, you know, and bravery on her behalf. In the climax of the movie, they realize that the snow around them isn't falling; it's just kind of hovering, and this then allows James to deduce, or James and Amelia to both deduce that the balloon is damaged and that they're falling at the same rate as the snow. This causes them great alarm, obviously, because it means something is terribly wrong. And so, in an effort to slow their descent, they start throwing equipment out of the basket, hoping that they can slow their descent enough that they will survive impact. But they know that's very unlikely to happen. So the situation is getting worse and worse and worse. Amelia and James realize that their balloon is collapsing and they are plummeting towards the earth at an incredibly fast rate, a rate that they will not be able to survive. So they start jettisoning equipment in order to relieve the weight in the basket, but it's not enough. Then James has the idea that the basket itself, the thing that protects them from the sky itself, is too heavy. So they need to jettison the basket, which they do, and he tells Amelia to climb into the hoop, the hoop that is kind of supporting the bottom of the balloon. So in essence, they climb into a ring of friendship, a ring of protection, a ring of potential grace. And this is an act of faith. This is kind of a leap of faith, They do this in the hope that the balloon will slow down enough for them to survive. When Amelia realizes that they're still falling way too fast, they're literally just clasped to this wooden hoop beneath this rapidly plummeting balloon that is falling thousands and thousands of feet through the sky. And obviously she's thinking of her husband, Pierre, falling to earth like a star. She decides that she's going to make the ultimate sacrifice. She's going to do for James what Pierre did for her. And she's going to sacrifice her life and she's going to leap to her death in the hope that will slow the balloon just enough to allow James to survive. But of course, because friendship is fucking awesome, James says, no, we both survive or neither of us survive. Don't jump. And then because he chooses, symbolically, because he chooses friendship over self-preservation, he is graced with inspiration. And that inspiration takes the form of his father's childhood dream. When his father said, I used to dream of taking my bedsheet, catching a gust of wind, and dancing with a parachute amongst the stars. This gives James the idea that they can cut the bottom of the balloon, suck the balloon up into itself, creating a kind of makeshift parachute. And this might just be enough to slow them down before they hit the earth. Amelia says it's not going to work, and James says it has to work. And they take each other's hands and they're smiling at each other, even though they know they're going to hit the ground still at an incredibly fast speed. They know they still might not survive, but they take each other's hands and they're smiling as they slam through the canopy of the trees and eventually hit the ground. So they get scathed, they get battered and bruised, they get a little bit fucked up, as it were, but they survive. And in the epilogue of the movie, we see that James and Amelia are once again flying. They're once again taking to the skies in a different balloon, and their friendship has kind of been cemented and solidified. They are equals now, and James is wiser, but he's also more hopeful. And Amelia has managed to process and overcome the grief of her husband's death because she didn't have to suffer the same fate. She had a friend, she had someone beside her who was willing to think outside the box, quite literally, and give her another option. She doesn't have to live in grief and darkness. She doesn't have to be afraid of the sky anymore. And I think that's beautiful, because throughout the movie, it's kind of suggested that Amelia's whole life has been about being a pilot, has been about being an aeronaut, has been about trying to honor her husband's memory and her own dreams by reaching for the stars, by searching the sky for some kind of higher meaning. And through the course of the movie, she kind of indirectly finds that higher meaning. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, so in conclusion, that's just a kind of a roundabout way of me discussing a movie that I absolutely adore. A movie that on the surface is kind of It might not seem like much of anything to anyone, but to me, it's full of depth and subtleties and hidden secrets. There's way more to the movie than I've discussed here. And as I said earlier in the video, some of that was placed there by the filmmakers, I would imagine, but I suspect that a lot of that depth was put there by a higher power, which is fitting for a movie about flight. I really recommend that movie if you haven't seen it. It also features a beautiful closing credits song by the Norwegian artist Sigrid, a song called Home to You, that is quite beautiful lyrically and encapsulates many of the themes of the movie quite well. So yeah, that's it for now. Stay dreaming, stay hopeful, and reach for the stars. I'll speak to you soon, guys. Peace.